Which round one wide receiver would make the most sense for the Dallas Cowboys? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on
Cowboys.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM app. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise, this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON, all in caps, in the game. I am Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. He is Landon McCool. Check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we are talking about some first-round wide receiver targets for the Cowboys. Did you have fun watching this group?
I did. Yeah, it's a good group. I'm excited about the class overall. I think, there's just, it seems like every time I'm elbow deep in one of these folks, I hear about 2 or 3 more guys that I have to check out on Twitter or wherever. So I'm excited to kind of talk about these folks and then frankly, kind of dive back into it to see a couple more after this.
So the 3 receivers that we are going to be discussing today are TCU's Quentin Johnston, USC's Jordan Addison, and Ohio State's Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Just off the top, I don't see a wide receiver in this class that's like a lock top 10 pick. Frankly, there might not even be a lock top 15 pick in this class. But if you are in the market for a wide receiver too, this does feel like a pretty good draft for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about it. I do think that, one of these guys is going to be sort of artificially pushed up because I think teams are going to try to convince themselves that he's kind of I think he could be a wide receiver one type, but I do think that the vast majority of types of receivers in this class, it is more of that kind of angling to be more of a high-end wide receiver too, as opposed to a guy that you kind of build an offense around exclusively.
All right, let's start with Johnston from TCU.
He's the guy.
Probably the one guy that you mentioned that's most likely to be thought of as a wide receiver 6'4", 220 pounds, maybe the best athlete in the class. But what did you see from him on tape?
Well, certainly fits the mold. He's good height. He's got great length. He's tall, lean with the kind of a muscular body type. He's similar to DeAndre Hopkins. I thought physically looking kind of incredible leaper. He's going to track the ball and then moss defensive backs with his jump ability and his arm length. He can make the acrobatic catches that will make your eyes big. I mean, you're definitely going to see a lot of highlights of this guy. He doesn't quite stop on a dime. He takes a bit to kind of gather his feet at the top of his route when he's trying to stop or break. And he looks more comfortable on routes where he can kind of one cut in a direction while trying to maintain his momentum, as opposed to like routes where he's going to have to gather his feet at the top of the route to stop, either like on a stop route or like an out-breaking route. I think he's less effective on those. He's tough to tackle after the catch. He uses his big body well, can slip around defenders, has kind of a slashing running style. There are times that I wish he would snatch the ball a bit more instead of letting it into his body. I mean, you even see it on jump balls at times where it feels like he's trying to body catch the ball.
Like he's 6'4", 220, but he doesn't play like a Mike Williams or a Mike Evans.
Yeah.
That way, right? Like he's more finesse than he is, I'm gonna box you out. This is my ball.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. He's one of these guys who his body type doesn't quite match his style of play. Like he's not a physical, tough guy player necessarily. That he is more of a kind of finesse it sort of guy. He has some shifty releases. He isn't, like I said, he isn't great at start-stop overall, but can drop his hips and shake cornerbacks at the line of scrimmage. He can really open it up once he's allowed to run in strides. He eats up grass quickly once he reached that top gear and he's allowed to stretch his legs. I think he will be a dominant middle of the field receiver. He routes that allow him to break inside without losing momentum. He's going to be really good deep, crossers, 8 routes, bang 8s. I think that's the kind of thing that you're going to see him really succeed in. Where does he win? I mean, he's the kind of X receiver prototype with kind of a slashing running style. My unanswered question is he kind of limited to an X receiver type role in the NFL? I don't see the kind of shake and kind of lateral explosion to be too useful in the slot. I think he could be kind of a vertical slot player to some degree. But to me, this guy seems like a very prototypical X receiver in those kind of Coriel systems where you're drawing attention and you're effective kind of in breaking routes down the field.
I'll be honest, he left me a little bit disappointed when I watched him because I was hoping that he would be like this, which he is. He's a fantastic athlete at his size, but I wanted him to be like just a bully after the catch and be somebody that you can move all around and play him in a slot, play him in the backfield, play him as an X receiver. And that's just not really who he is. He's more of a line him up at one spot and let him run down the field. We should also mention he drops a ton of passes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at PFF right now. He has a 12% drop rate. And usually I don't care about drops, but if you're not a polished receiver, which he's not, and you're dropping a lot of passes, and I worry about how you get off of press coverage and stuff, I have concerns. The other thing is his contested catch rate, you mentioned this, is like well below the 50th percentile. And if you're that big in college and you're struggling with contested catches, I'm not sure how I can trust you in the NFL to all of a sudden get a lot better in that area.
I think that, I would say if I didn't think that he was such a good athlete, I would say that I feel like he could potentially be falling into that kind of danger zone area of receivers that, who was that kid that came out of Mississippi a couple years ago that just never panned out? I mean, just like these. Yeah, well, okay, him too. Of these big guys, wide receivers who like can't separate, and like we kind of make excuses for them, and then they get into the league and like they can't do it, and they have all these highlights. They have incredible stats at extremely high level, and their game translates all the way up until the NFL. Right? I don't know that he's quite that because I think he is a better athlete than. I wish I could remember what this guy's name specifically was, but there's those kind of receivers who like just win so consistently on contested catch or just being a bigger, better athlete than the guy in college, and then it gets to the NFL and it doesn't kind of transcribe that same way. I think he's a first rounder. I think he's going to be overdrafted because I feel like he's really only the X receiver prototype. And I feel like that prototype in general gets overdrafted. But I don't know that I have concerns about his ability to produce at the level that I would be expecting of him based on where I feel like he's going to get drafted.
I wrote down Corey Davis as my comp for him.
Yeah.
Coming
Okay.
Out of, Western Michigan, because Davis was this freaky athlete with great size, and he ran he's like a 4.40 type of receiver, but dropped a lot of passes and just wasn't super refined. And now he's had his moments in the NFL. I think he's been hampered by bad quarterback play, but Corey Davis went 5th overall, I think, in 2017. These kind of guys get drafted really high. And we're talking about Johnston as a potential pick for the Cowboys, but to be honest, I would be shocked if he's within 7 picks of where the Cowboys draft. I just would be.
The name is Laquan Treadwell. That's who I was thinking of.
Oh, I thought you were thinking about. I thought you said Missouri.
No, I said Miss. Maybe I did, but I meant Ole Miss. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
I think it's that kind of guy, right? Where the skill set is enough that you're going to take a swing, right? But the problem is that unless this guy has like some traits like beyond that kind of, and again, he's not even necessarily that kind of like contested ball catcher, even in college. So yeah, I have fears that because he's the unique body type in this class, especially amongst these, first round wide receivers, that he's going to get drafted higher than then he's going to be able to produce that, especially early on, and that's going to cause problems.
I will say, I think there's some other schemes out there where he could go and thrive. I'm just not
Sure.
sure it's the Cowboys scheme. I
Yeah.
think the Cowboys are looking for a different type of receiver, maybe someone like Jordan Addison from USC, who we'll discuss next. This episode is brought to you by the Ultimate Football GM app. You've heard us talk about this mobile game app before, and I can't tell you how much fun I had competing against some of the other Locked On NFL hosts. But now it's your turn to compete. More on that in just a second. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, well, your dream has come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. With the Ultimate Football GM app, you're going to be responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency and the draft, and all the ups and downs of the season. All this in a challenging but realistic game world. The Ultimate Football GM app is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've created a Locked On League for you to compete against other Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? All you have to do is choose the Locked On League in the App Store to join, and we'll see if you can create your own football dynasty. Locked On Cowboys listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using promo code Locked On, all in caps, in the game store. That is Locked On, all in caps. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. That is ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Landon, let's discuss USC wide receiver Jordan Addison, who I've got a feeling you might like a little bit more for the Cowboys.
Yeah, absolutely. What an odd and very unique path he's had in his college career, right? I mean, he goes to obviously school close to you geography wise at Pitt, and becomes the Biletnikoff winner his sophomore year, right? Because he's a junior, isn't he? Yeah, his sophomore year wins the Biletnikoff Award, and then transfers away from Pitt to go to play with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and that crew over at USC. And has numerically not quite the same season as a Biletnikoff year, obviously, but still, was interesting to kind of watch him in that offense and see him thrive. He's got kind of average height. I mean, I think if we're being kind, right? And I think has a slight build, but he also may have his body close to tapped out. He's very. He's not short. There's other guys out there in the class. You talk about Tank Dell and some of these guys who are actually, sub 5'9" receivers. Jordan Addison is not that, but he is probably under 180 pounds, I would say, or maybe at 100.
Close. Yeah.
And just based on what you look at him, I don't know that he's getting any bigger, that maybe is what he is. He's versatile. He's very versatile. He lines up all over and runs a ton of different routes. You see him in the backfield. You see him in the slot. You see him outside. One thing that we'll talk about that I like about him, and there are some similarities, I think, between him, his game at least, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba, except that I think that the kind of speed rankings and quickness and those things are all played with. But as far as some of the better parts of their game, I do think that he also converts himself from receiver to ball carrier very quickly. Yeah. And that's one thing I really like about some of these speedier guys is that, they're going to make their living or not always, but part of what they're going to make their living doing is screens and short passes and getting the ball to them quickly. And the speed in which they can secure the ball and then become a ball carrier is so important when you're talking about some of these tunnel screens and just kind of transitioning quickly. Both of these guys do that very well. Addison's not, I wouldn't say, an elite yak guy in the sense that he's not going to break a ton of tackles. He just doesn't have the mass to generate a ton of force behind his running. And you see that, he's trying to take angles where he's not going to be interrupted in his speed so that he can continue to accelerate. But if he gets, hit by an arm or has any of his momentum lost, it will throw him off track a little bit because he's just not a very big guy.
I got his official size here. So
Yeah,
from
let's
NFL
hear it.
Scouts, 5'11", 1, so just over 5'11",
Okay.
175. Now, I won't be surprised if he comes in at the combine at like 182, but like we're just not talking about a big player here. Like he's shorter. I mean, not short. He's just slighter.
Yeah, he's not short. That's the thing is that I would say he's
5'11" is more than fine.
average height. Yeah, like there are, like I said, there are definitely guys who are shorter than him in this draft. I think the thing that you worry about is the combination of the height and the size. He's very slight. It's just like it doesn't affect his game outside of the fact that he gets tackled easily. Despite all that, I will say that he will get slung around and remain on his feet. He does have very good contact balance to kind of survive arm tackles. It just will, he's not running through them. So woefully underpowered as a run blocker, but his effort is excellent. He does try. He's just not blocking anybody. No. He's a hands catcher. I do like that about his game. He snatches the ball away from his body. He does a good job of knowing kind of the angles he needs to put his palms in order to properly receive the ball. He tracks the ball extremely well. There are like 3 or 4 different times when you see him a deep ball being thrown and he just times it perfectly over his shoulder and then just, catches it right in the basket, right in stride, like he had timed it up perfectly. Definitely excellent over the shoulder catcher. He's very sudden in and out of his breaks at the line of scrimmage. He's got the feet of a flamingo dancer. He's got a number of great releases off the line. Like his feet are incredible, especially at the line of scrimmage. He has a high floor, I feel like, due to NFL ready separation and release skills. Where does he win? He's versatile, experienced, and reliable with speed, which I think is, pretty great. I mean, almost like, one wide receiver 1 traits. But again, his unanswered question to me is, will he ever be able to consistently break tackles? I think that's honestly the thing that's keeping him from being that kind of upper echelon wide receiver 1 type, is that I think he just doesn't have that element to his game. Everything else here looks very polished for a guy coming into the NFL.
And I think that's why he's going to fall outside the top 15 and potentially be in the range for the Cowboys, is because there are going to be a lot of teams that say, okay, hey, he's under 100, he's under 6 foot. He's under 185 pounds. He doesn't run a sub 4.4 40-yard dash, and he doesn't break tackles. That's just not a top 15 receiver for us, right? And to be fair, I agree. But if you're drafting in the back half of the first round, this is the player that profiles the best as like a wide receiver 2, a high-end wide receiver 2, especially for a team like the Cowboys that already has a wide receiver 1, or a Vikings that already have Justin Jefferson. A couple of numbers really quickly. According to Pro Football Focus, 94th percentile in separation percentage, 92nd percentile in separation percentage versus single coverage, 91st percentile receiving grade versus single coverage. Yeah. Like, he's so good in one-on-one opportunities, and that's exactly what Dallas needs from their number 2 receiver. Like, if you're going to be in a one-on-one situation, are you going to get open and are you going to catch the ball? That's exactly what Jordan Addison does.
I think you know what you're getting with this guy. And I think that in that sense, not in a way that you normally do with these types of players because of those numbers that you just mentioned. Like, a lot of these times you see these guys that come in and they have experience, but they've done it against a whole bunch of zone coverage. They've done it against, lesser competition. This is a guy who won the Biletnikoff, transferred to a higher level of competition, honestly, and then maintained that same level of at least on an individual play dominance against man coverage. I mean, that's against single coverage, and that's what
he's going to be schemes. That's what's so impressive. 2 different schemes, 2 different
very
quarterbacks.
Different schemes. Yeah.
I think that actually makes me feel better about him. Like, if he would have just stayed at Pitt and had another 1,200-yard year and 7 touchdowns, we would have still liked him. But the fact that he's played with multiple different quarterbacks and multiple different coaches and has balled out, I think the floor is so high here.
Yep, absolutely. And I think he can come in and be a contributor right away just because of all the things you talked about. His specific skill set is something that he's not going to have to learn on the fly, while other wide receivers are still trying to figure out how to fight off press, how to get off the line of scrimmage in the NFL. So I think he'll come in basically ready to do that.
And I know I mentioned to you yesterday when we were talking on the phone about him, I see a lot of Emmanuel Sanders to his game, kind of one of these receivers that can play outside, can play in the slot, not really super, fast or has a great build, but just somebody who gets open all the time. And if you pair him with like a Demaryius Thomas, like Emmanuel Sanders was, and you give him a CeeDee Lamb, I think Jordan Addison can be awesome. Another comp that I gave you was Tyler Lockett, because Tyler Lockett doesn't break tackles at all. In fact, he's kind of bad after the catch, but he's been able to have a really long career in the NFL because he's just avoided taking a lot of extra contact. I could see Addison doing something very similar in the NFL.
And like Sanders too, he doesn't have elite speed, but he's got good enough speed that if you miss him, he's gone. He will score long touchdowns
like that, right?
Yeah,
it's just not. Yeah. He's not Tyreek Hill or
he's not going to beat you exclusively with speed, but he has the speed that if you're beaten, that you're beaten. You're probably not catching him. So definitely a high floor receiver who's got a lot of upside, or maybe not a lot of upside, but definitely will provide you a safe floor. And then, from there, he can get a little bit better. He can get a little bit more savvy with his routes. And like I said, I think his top end is probably an extremely high wide receiver one. Maybe for some team that's desperate or in transition, he could be a low end wide receiver one for you.
All right, let's talk about one more receiver from Ohio State, who's maybe the most polarizing receiver in this class next. All right, Landon, let's talk about Ohio State wide receiver Jaxon Smith-Njigba. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts here. What did you think of him when you put on the tape? The 2021 tape, not the 2022 tape.
I did a little bit of both because he did play a couple of games earlier this year, but I will say that I am intrigued. Look, I've called you several times during this whole process and say, hi, it's me, guy who's ignorant on 2021 college football season. I definitely was about to send out a tweet about can't wait to dig into this Jaxon Njigba tape from 2022, only to look up and see that he was injured for most of the year. I am a little bit surprised before the transition we came into this segment. You mentioned that he's a little bit controversial pick, or how'd you phrase it? You said he's a little polarizing, because I love this guy. I really did like this guy. I think he's got average height with good arm length and decent muscle density, specifically in the lower body. I think he looks really well filled out in the lower body. He looks equal parts receiving back as he does receiver, I think. He's a snatcher. He's a hands catcher, has great instinct on what angle to present his hands in order to receive the ball. That's one thing I really liked about him, is that the art of receiving the football, this guy has a master class in it. I don't know that I've ever seen, and we talked about it with Addison a little bit, but his transition from receiver to ball carry is unlike any I think I've ever seen before. He's just it's not just that he's an incredibly natural receiver. He just has great instincts. Like we said, he just knows where to put his hands to catch it. He brings it in quickly, secures the ball, and then he has such great field vision and football IQ that he's incredibly decisive. Once he has the ball and he secures it, he makes a decision immediately and he's gone. And that's what makes him so dangerous in some of these tunnel screens and some of these quick stuff, is that he's not the fastest guy. I don't think he's necessarily going to run much faster than a 4.5, but he's so decisive, and there's no wasted motion in any part of his game, especially in the short yardage passing game, that it really throws off defensive backs' angles. It throws people's angles. They can't tackle him. He has really good pace with his stem routes when he's running early parts of the routes. He runs with a forward lean and with just a kind of a quicker pace than some of these other receivers. You see some guys kind of slow roll their routes as they try to get defensive backs ready, and then they break them down. This guy runs with such an increased pace that he eats up cushion quickly, and then by the time he breaks, and he does so fluidly, the defensive backs don't have time to react, and he just creates natural separation that way. I think he will make a living on screens, short passes, and intermediate work, but he doesn't offer as much in a down the field skill set.
Yeah,
he can slip loose via route running to catch a deep pass, but he isn't leaving cornerbacks in the dust. He isn't mossing defensive backs above the rim down the field. That's just not his game. His game is very yak reliant. He'll line up all over. He's a versatile player. Again, another guy that you saw line up in the backfield, line up in the slot, line up outside. They motion him in, they motion him out. They do reverses. They hand him the ball. He does orbital motions. They throw him the ball out of the backfield, orbiting and then going back out the other way. Incredible, great ankle flexion, has incredible lean in his game and plays with a very good pad level. He just plays with a very good forward lean and low center of gravity, so his pad level stays low. He's a good blocker because he's solid and strong in the lower body, and he's very, very willing. High floor, and again, another high floor. I think ceiling will be likely based on his usage because it's going to be all about where you want to line him up and what you're doing with him opposite of other receivers in the offense. I don't want to oversell him, but he is just one of those guys who you watch what he does, and he does so many small things so well that in a complementary way that all kind of complement each other, that it adds up to something that is a sum larger than its parts, right? Like he's not going to blow anybody away with his 40s. He's not going to, have a 40-inch vertical. But he does so many small things about the position well, and he's the word I kept on coming back is natural. He's just so natural at the position. I think he's going to be a successful player. Where does he win? Smart, natural, versatile receiver with plus yak production. Unanswered questions. Can he create downfield the way he does elsewhere? I just don't think that's part of his game. But if you're looking for a guy in the 20 yards or less range to just dominate the middle of the field, the flats, to be an outlet guy, to be a guy who line up in their backfield, to maybe carry some footballs, I think this is a guy that you love to have on your team. Is a versatile player who works hard, who's reliable. These are the kind of guys that you need on your football team to win games at a lot of different positions. But I love this type of player. I honestly was very enamored with him.
Okay. Not that I disagree with basically everything you said. I'm just going to ask you some questions because this is why he is considered controversial. The size is 6 foot, almost on the dot, 200 pounds, which is fine, right? That's a good body type.
Yeah.
There's some rumblings out there that the 40 is going to be like 4.57 to 4.59, which, okay, that's happened before. We've had some receivers. Cooper Kupp is a great example, right? Right.
Yep.
4.61 or whatever. The difference is Cooper Kupp was 6'3", 207 pounds rather than 6 foot. Does it concern you drafting a 4.55 plus receiver in round one?
No, because this is the kind of guy that exactly I don't worry about his 40. Like this is the type of guy who I would tell you to ignore his 40 type because his game is so refined. He's so smooth in every single thing he does that his play speed is faster than his time speed, in my opinion.
So, okay. Again, I think I agree with you. The problem is that typically and historically, those guys just go later in the draft, right? Like I'm thinking about Amon-Ra St. Brown, who went in the 5th round, right?
Mm-hmm.
Cooper Kupp went in the 3rd round. I know Lance Zierlein at NFL.com compared him to Jarvis Landry, who went into the 3rd round. So
That's a good comparison? I like that.
Do you have to take this player into the 1st round if you can find similar type of players a round or two later?
I think that's how we miss people like this, right? Is because
probably right. I think that's probably the answer.
I think that the problem is that what makes him special is extremely hard to define. I think there are times when we get to the draft, and honestly, this is exactly the kind of conversation I wanted to have. There are times when we are too smart about this stuff. And we just overlook what is a very good football player, and we can't fit them into the boxes that we want. But we watch the tape and like, this guy is very good at football. Like he is very good at playing the position of wide receiver, And so it's like
I think when people were talking about him as a top 10 pick, I think that's too rich for me. But when we're talking about him as a late 1st rounder, that's when I'm like, okay, now I can see it, right? Because
I was gonna say, I think he has that value, that late 1st round value, but I think he's pushed up to there because of all the kind of natural aspects. I think the idea of him being kind of the top 10, top 15, that's for the freaks, right? That's for
those are the guys that can do the underneath stuff and give you a vertical element.
Yeah.
He's just not going to do that for you.
Yeah, he's a specialized player. He's just very, very good at that specialty. And I think that's what kind of what I meant by the complementary aspects. Like the small things that he does well adds up to a very complete package of a player. A complete package in the sense that this is a short area wide receiver, a slot wide receiver, a versatile wide receiver. Like it's a very, I guess what I'm getting at is it's not like a complete situation. I get a whole picture of him.
Yeah.
That, not that he's a complete wide receiver. I just see the whole picture with him. It's very easy to look at him and see what he's going to do in the NFL and the level of success he's had. I think that the way you miss on a player like this is that you look at that, you look at it, and then you go look at the 40 times, you go look at the all this other stuff, and then you're like, you've convinced yourself he can't do it, despite the fact that he did this for 2.5 years at Ohio State at the highest level against the best players in college football. So, yeah, I like him a lot because I think, especially for our offense, I mean, you could put him anywhere. He could carry the ball from the backfield. You could play him in the slot. You could play him as a Z. You can motion him out. I just think he's the kind of reliable, versatile piece that can, be someone who on third down, will find the opening in the zone and will catch the football when it gets delivered to him. I think those kind of guys are not valued correctly in the NFL because I think that it's difficult sometimes to see them because their value exists outside of 40 times, 3 cones, receiving yardage his senior year. It exists in that kind of nebulous area between the numbers.
If you could pick one of these 3 receivers for the Cowboys to draft at 26, who are you picking?
I really do still like Jordan Addison. Like I as much as I have just said all that stuff about Jaxon, I think I like Jaxon because I want to bang the table for him.
Sure.
I think Jordan Addison adds an element to your team. He has a speed element that Jaxon doesn't have. Yeah. That maybe they're probably touching for me, honestly. I think
it's Addison for me just because of the speed, right?
Yeah, I think that's where I would be too, probably.
Again, not a great wide receiver class if you need a number 1 guy inside the top 15, but teams drafting in the second half of the first round, I think you're going to be pretty happy with the quality of receivers here. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for tuning in. We want to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Go check us out on YouTube. You can follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We'll see you guys right back here tomorrow.